Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Wednesday, September 22nd. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Moore. The Akron game is in 3 days, the game against Michigan in 66 days. Every once in a while, when I'm on our Ask the Insiders board at BuckeyeScoop.com, I read something so good that I'm like already picking up my phone to text whoever wrote it to see when they can come on the Morning Scoop next. So Tuesday was one of those days, twice over actually. Ross Fulton had a fantastic piece about what the Buckeyes learned from the Oregon loss and how they used it against Tulsa. I'll have Ross on tomorrow's show to talk about that. But last night, I read Alex Gleitman's ADEC column and knew exactly what I wanted to talk about today. He joins me now. Alex, this is one of my favorite things I've read on the site, maybe in the last year. So let people know who you talked to for that piece.
Yeah, so without giving away too much of who my source is, I spoke with as I said on the board, I don't have as expansive of a network as someone like a Bill Green does, but in my 14 years doing this, I've been fortunate enough to build some relationships with some guys who have some started at Ohio State, some started some other places. But a lot of these guys or girls have scattered throughout the country in support staff roles, into coaching roles, some of them now even head coaching roles, and have kept in touch with a number of them. Obviously, when you cover recruiting, a lot of coaches want to remain in touch because you got some information for them that they can't get. And I've been fortunate enough to keep in contact with this one person who is now on staff at an opposing Big Ten team. And their team actually will be playing Ohio State this year. So they've been following Ohio State a little bit this year, watching what they can. They've watched either part or a full game of all of Ohio State's 3 games, and as well as, some highlights and things like that. And, they don't do the full breakdown of film, but they start to piece some of the things together in advance. And so I had the opportunity to talk to this person. They actually called me about something unrelated, and I had to ask them what their thoughts on Ohio State were through 3 games this year. And I got some pretty good stuff, I think, as you saw on the board.
Yeah, for sure. It was, like I said, it was one of my favorite pieces because it's just you're getting like very informed opinions from someone who is really doing, does this professionally and is, completely outside the Ohio State program. So you don't have the personal bias or the political considerations. It's just like real straight, unvarnished. So let's start on the defense because that's been a hot topic for the last couple of weeks. There was a line in that piece that you made me laugh out loud. It's a direct quote. I saw this change some looks up on defense against Tulsa. Was hoping that wouldn't be the case by the time they played us. So what did he mean by that?
Yeah, well, again, he or she.
Yeah, sorry.
Meant that ultimately, I think from my conversation with them that they felt that if Ohio State kept winning, that nothing would change, and that the loss to Oregon forced Ryan Day, even though I think deep inside, he obviously knew there was something off with the defense, dating back to certain parts of last year, obviously. And then through the first few games this year, that if they kept winning, that they would kind of almost like sweep it under the rug to some extent. But because they lost, and they really can't afford another loss this year if they want to still accomplish winning the Big Ten and going to the college football playoff, potentially winning a national title, all those things are still within reach. That they had to change something and change it fast. And it's not just the switch of Kerry Combs to Matt Barnes. I think it's, what this person felt was that Ohio State was being very, very predictable, very vanilla on defense, not changing up their looks, not disguising their coverages post-snap. What you saw was what you were getting. And I think I don't think they watched the whole Tulsa game, but seeing what they saw of it, they already noticed that they were going into different coverages pre-snap, rotating post-snap, throwing some different blitzes, playing, mixing zone with man. So I think that they feel that now this is going to be an evolution. You can't install everything in 1 week. So over time, Ohio State's going to continue to mix in more things that are going to give offenses different looks. And obviously, this person would have much preferred their team to be able to scheme against a very, as Oklahoma loved to say in the past, basic defense.
I was going to say, I think I remember someone having thoughts on Ohio State's basic defense in the past. For a long, long time, the Buckeye defense has been able to be a little bit basic because they've been able to rely on that defensive line to get pressure, make things easier on the whole rest of that unit. If that defensive line's getting pressure, The corners don't have to cover quite as long. The linebackers don't, maybe don't have blockers on them. They can come in clean. It sounds though like the dominant Ohio State defensive lines of the past, that is not what other coaching staffs, it sounds like, are seeing when they're watching film this year.
Yeah, I think my contact, at least I could only speak for them. I mean, the defensive line, they talked about, you have Chase Young, Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa. Forget anyone else on those lines. I mean, who, some of them are NFL players, but those guys in itself, you had to scheme for those, to double team those guys. And how are you going to stop those guys? Like, a lot of your defensive or your offensive focus was, how do you stop the Bosa brothers or how do you stop Chase Young? And I think this person doesn't feel that Ohio State has that guy. I know Zach Harrison's maybe supposed to be that guy. I know Tyreek Smith's maybe supposed to be that guy, but they just don't feel that the defensive line has anyone that really makes you shake in your boots. And I think, we've seen that through 3 games. And I think in this person's opinion, while there are obviously some inexperienced players playing in the back 7 and maybe some guys learning on the fly there, that if there was a sack master on that defensive line, or even if they were, not even one guy, even if they were getting Zach Harrison one game, Tyreek Smith one game, Haskell Garrett one game, like that, it would make the lives of the back 7 that much easier. And so when you don't have to worry about the 4-man rush like you have in the past against Ohio State, it makes things a lot easier if you're an offensive coordinator trying to game plan against them.
And there were some fascinating thoughts in there on the linebackers and the defensive backs, but you will have to be a subscriber at BuckeyeScoop.com to get those, because this is on our Ask the Insiders board. If you are a subscriber, just look for Alex's A-Deck column on the Ask the Insiders board. But I did want to ask you one more question about the defense. Ryan Day has posed the question, is this an issue of personnel or scheme or coaching? He's kind of shared some thoughts on that, and that it's maybe a little bit of all of them, but your contact had some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably is to some extent a little bit of all of them, but to me and my contact, the primary reason is coaching. And, the way they put it was, yeah, obviously there's going to be some players on every team where you would not trade them for their counterpart on Ohio State. But collectively, if you had to trade your whole roster for another roster, not one coach in the Big Ten, and probably like 99% of the country, would not trade their rosters for Ohio State's roster. So they feel that it's more of a situation of, you have these players, they're all 4- and 5-star players for the most part. You've out-recruited almost everyone in the country, maybe other than Alabama, maybe you throw like Georgia, Clemson in there. But like, it's your job as a coach to put your players in a position to succeed. And so whether your scheme isn't matching their skill set, whether you're making things too complex for them because they're not experienced, like, your job as a coach is to put both your offensive and defensive players in position to succeed. So this person thinks it's on the coaches to figure out what's the best scheme to play with your personnel. What's the best coverages to call? What's the best, where do you blitz and when? If your quarterback's struggling with the deep balls in middle of the field, maybe you stick to more of those bubble screens. If your offensive line with 5 new guys is struggling with certain blocking sets or different running plays, maybe you call the things that they do well. So I think there's a lot of things at play, and personnel, scheme, and coaching all fit into it. But ultimately, my person thinks that coaching is the end all be all for making sure that the right scheme is put into place and that the players are being put in a position to succeed.
And on the other side of the ball, CJ Stroud has been a really hot topic all season, which, I mean, that's like kind of normal for a quarterback. Like if anyone has any opinion on any person on the team, everyone always has an opinion on the quarterback, for good or for ill. That's especially true at a first-time starter. So what were your sources' thoughts on Stroud so far this fall?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think that they feel that he's just a young guy who never threw a pass before the first game of the season. I think they brought up a great point that I wasn't even thinking about. In 3 games against Minnesota, Oregon, and Tulsa, played 3 very different defensive schemes, personnel, systems. I mean, all three teams play a very different style of defense. And for a young guy who's never played in a live game, significant minutes, or never thrown a pass, that's not an easy thing to do. And then you add in the fact that you have 5 new offensive linemen. You add the fact in that, it's been a rotating door at running back, but you had a freshman starting last week. Obviously, he's got a bum shoulder too, which we know doesn't help the cause. But my guy feels that CJ Stroud, he's made mistakes. There's also been some unforced errors, some drops, some penalties that have caused some positive plays to be negated. But he just feels that, or they feel that, a lot of the issues have been magnified because of how poorly Ohio State's playing as a team. Like if the defense played better, maybe you wouldn't focus on Stroud as much. If easy balls weren't being dropped by veterans and wide receiver and tight end, or there weren't penalties that negate, big plays, maybe you wouldn't be focusing on all of CJ Stroud's errors. But because of everything that's going on with Ohio State football, everyone's eyeballs are on CJ Stroud, every move he's making. And, the person I spoke to just feels that this is a normal young player going through growing pains, isn't being helped out by his coaches, isn't being helped out by the players around him necessarily, certainly not the defense, and putting pressure on him to have to score almost every single drive down the field. And so they think he's going to be fine in time, pending obviously that he's healthy, and that, fans need to just be a little bit more patient with a young quarterback. I mean, in my opinion, you watch 2 of the best passing quarterbacks of all time at Ohio State just come through. And so it's hard to remember what it was like before Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields throwing the football around. I think my contact is right in that fans need to just be a little bit more patient with CJ Stroud as he kind of gets his feet out from under him and gets a little bit of experience in live games.
You've mentioned the offensive line a couple times in some different contexts while we've been talking. So let me ask you about those. The unit has not been quite as dominating, I think, as people expected this year. And, obviously part of that is injuries. You haven't seen Harry Miller there. Munford missed kind of most of the game last week. But it sounds like from what you were told, there could be some other things at play there as well, beyond just the injuries.
Yeah, well, I think you have, while Thayer Munford and Nick Petit-Frere were starters last year, they're now both playing 2 different positions. Petit-Frere from right tackle to left tackle, Thayer Munford from left tackle to left guard. As you mentioned, Harry Miller's been out. And even if he was starting at center, yes, he started, I think, a game or 2 there last year, but technically he was the starting left guard last year. So that would be someone in a new position. But Luke Whippler is a brand new starter. Paris Johnson, a brand new starter at right guard. And, of course, DeJuan Jones, a brand new starter at right tackle. Even Matt Jones coming in for Thayer Munford was never a full-time starter. I think he started the Michigan State game last year and might have started the Clemson and Alabama games, if I remember correctly, because Harry Miller was out due to COVID. But that said, I think the offensive line in general, even if you have 5 returning starters, is the unit that's probably last to kind of click on all cylinders, just because they kind of have to get their bearings down. It's very important that, the sum of all parts is greater. The sum is greater than the parts, right? So I think that, when you add in the fact that there's 3 new starters, in addition to all 5 guys playing new positions, and the fact that the offensive line in general takes a little bit longer to kind of get going as a unit and really work to their optimal performance, I think, you're kind of what you're seeing now makes a lot of sense from the offensive line. There's inconsistencies. They look good sometimes, bad at others. I think by the end of the year, this is going to be a strength of this team, and my contact thinks the same thing. But right now, they're not perfect. They're not as good as maybe we thought they were going to be at this point in the year. But as Jim Tressel said, September is for pretenders. November is for contenders. So if Ohio State can just continue to win, just win games, doesn't matter by how much or whatever, and they could get to November with still just the Oregon loss, and they can continue to get better every single week as a team, which I expect certainly of the offensive line. I think they're going to have a chance to do some special things this year.
Well, and your contact had some thoughts on the personnel packages the Buckeyes have been leaning on this fall, But to hear those, you can, again, subscribe to BuckeyeScoop.com and then read Alex's ADEC column on our Ask the Insiders board there to learn more about that, as well as some of the other stuff we haven't talked about. It is, again, a fantastic read. Really, really enjoyed it. So that is absolutely worth your time and worth checking out. But Alex, before I let you go, did want to touch just briefly on recruiting. Five-star quarterback A.J. Harris just announced last night that Ohio State is a finalist for his services. He announced, I think, a top 7, and then said he'll be announcing his decision in January. So obviously someone Ohio State would really, really love to have. He camped at Ohio State last summer, and they really seemed to like him. He really seemed to like them at that point. But now it's been a couple months. So where do you think things stand with the Buckeyes and A.J. Harris right now?
Yeah, I think Ohio State leads for A.J. Harris. I think Clemson, Georgia, right on their heels for sure. But I think you set the date. You pretty much know where you're going. I know that with him, he wanted to do this early, and he wants to take visits throughout this fall, including one to Ohio State on October 9th for the Maryland game. So maybe it's just a matter of I'm going to take my visits and then I'm going to buckle down and make a decision. But I do think he's leaning toward Ohio State. Now, what I will say, the one thing I'm a little concerned about is Kerry Combs, I think, is a really big part of this recruitment. And, he got demoted, and you have to think about the future there. And if you're A.J. Harris, when I come on October 9th, I'm asking hard questions. Is Kerry Combs going to be here when I come to play for the Buckeyes? Because if the answer is, we can't promise anything on that, I mean, maybe that has him think twice about Ohio State, and maybe he pushes back his decision and waits to see what happened, or he goes through with it and then sees what happened. And then, you can always open things back up. Remember, he's a 2023 kid, so he's not signing his letter of intent until at the earliest December of 2022. So you almost have a full year between this commitment and when he signs his letter of intent. Kid from Alabama, you can guarantee that this isn't going to be the end of people recruiting him, although I think he is the type of kid who would like to stick to his word. But things like coaching changes could cost anyone who even wants to stick to their word to change their mind, because this is all about comfort and relationships. So that's something I'd keep a close eye on. I'm certainly hopeful when you talk about, if you're an Ohio State fan, that even if Kerry Combs isn't the defensive coordinator moving forward, that somehow they can keep him on staff, because I think he's done a really good job developing DBs in the past. He's obviously a tremendous recruiter, especially at that position. So he'd be a valuable asset for Ohio State. And I think, securing a guy like A.J. Harris, it's important to have him on staff.
Well, we mentioned your ADEC column that you wrote this week. You're also the host of the Around the Oval podcast, which is always a fantastic listen. And I hear you have one of my favorite guests on this week. I'll have Ross Fulton on the Morning Scoop later in the week. But what did you talk to Ross about this week for Around the Oval?
Yeah, so Ross and I kind of just did we're through 25% of the season, which is crazy to say at this point. But what do you think of Ohio State? What's the issues on offense? How do they fix them? What's the issues on defense? How do they fix them? Where do we see, how do we see Ohio State finishing the rest of the year? We give our predictions on that. And then I think the biggest question in Buckeye Nation right now is CJ Stroud the guy for Ohio State? Should he be the starting quarterback? Should they turn to someone else if they don't this week or in the next couple games? When should they? How long is the leash? So we went into all those topics pretty in depth. And, as you said it, Ross does an awesome job. I get headaches reading his articles because it makes me think a lot, but I think that's a good thing. He just knows football really, really well. And to hear him explain some of the things that are going on in Ohio State right now is just awesome insight.
Yeah, Ross knows football well enough to explain it to dummies who, like me, who do not know football as well as Ross does. So he can kind of simplify it, dumb it down, make it a little more understandable. So yeah, I love talking to Ross for that reason. So yeah, you can find that episode of Around the Oval and all of our podcasts on whatever podcast platform you like. So for Alex's podcast, search Around the Oval, but you can also just search Buckeye Scoop, and then all of our podcasts will come up. You can subscribe right there so you never miss an episode. Also leave us a 5-star rating or review. That helps other folks find those shows as well. And, most of our shows are pretty good. I do love Around the Oval. Leave that a 5-star review. That is a fantastic listen every week. So, and then also make sure you check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the little bell. You can subscribe to our channel. We're closing in on 10,000 subscribers. I don't think 10,000 subscribers could possibly be wrong. So why don't you join them and hit that little bell and subscribe to our channel? What'll happen then is you get notified every time we post a new video. So when we post a new podcast, when we post a new player coach interview, when we do a new pregame show, a new postgame show, We do all that stuff. A lot of that stuff we do live, so we don't know exactly when it's going to go up, and you want to watch it. So you get notified as soon as it goes live. That way you never miss anything. So hit that bell, subscribe. And at the end of this video, we'll also have a little Buckeye Scoop logo on the screen. You just click on that and that'll do the same thing. That'll subscribe you as well. And finally, BuckeyeScoop.com. Subscribe there. You get access to our Ask the Insiders board, our fantastic team of insiders, great content like Alex's ADAC column, and much, much more. That's all at BuckeyeScoop.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.